The sun had barely risen over the jagged horizon when Elena tightened the shawl around her shoulders, shivering against the morning chill. She was a young woman of 19, slender and unassuming, with deep hazel eyes that seemed to take in everything yet reveal nothing. Her life had been quiet, measured, and careful, a rhythm of routine punctuated by the occasional tremor of danger in a small frontier town where whispers of lawlessness were common. The dusty streets were still empty, save for a few early risers merchants hauling crates, children chasing one another between wooden buildings, and the distant echo of a blacksmith hammering iron. To anyone else, the town might have seemed ordinary, almost sleepy. But to Elena, every shadow held a potential threat, every sudden noise a possible menace. She had learned to move cautiously, silently, always aware of the world around her. Elena's life had been one of subtle restraint. Raised by her widowed mother, she had been taught to be polite, obedient, and careful. The world beyond the town was unknown and dangerous, full of men who measured women by their vulnerability and children by their usefulness. She had grown up hearing tales of violence, of travelers lost to bandits, of strangers with cruel intentions. And yet, she carried a quiet strength, one born from necessity and careful observation. Her mother had often told her, "Elena, the world won't wait for you to be ready. Watch, listen, and choose your steps wisely." Across the same town, a different presence stirred Tayanita, a Lakota warrior. His name, meaning "he who protects," suited him in every way. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a steady grace of someone accustomed to danger, Tayanita moved through the streets with purpose. His dark eyes missed nothing, the way a merchant's cart leaned precariously, the subtle tension in a group of strangers speaking too loudly, the flicker of fear in a child's glance. His people had taught him the art of vigilance and honor, the sacred duty to protect those who could not protect themselves. Yet he was not merely a guardian in duty, he carried a quiet intensity, a controlled fire that seemed to simmer just beneath the surface. The first encounter between Elena and Tayanita had yet to happen, but fate was already weaving the threads. Elena, unaware, paused near the edge of town, peering down a narrow alley that she had never explored before. She had been drawn by a faint cry, a whisper of trouble and instinct, honed over years of quiet survival, urged her to move closer. Tayanita, walking with deliberate steps toward the outskirts, sensed the disturbance almost instantly. There was a tension in the air, a pulse that signaled imbalance. His instincts, sharp and unerring, told him someone needed protection, someone vulnerable, someone unaware of the peril approaching. The morning sun cast long shadows that danced across weathered wood and cobblestone, revealing two very different lives on a collision course. Elena, delicate yet resilient, embodied a fragility that demanded care, but also a courage born of necessity. Tayanita, formidable yet disciplined, carried both the power to defend and the wisdom to recognize genuine innocence when he saw it. Though they existed in the same space, they were worlds apart, each shaped by their histories. Fears and unspoken codes dot in this quiet beginning. Before danger struck, before vows were made, there was a palpable tension, a promise of connection, protection, and change. Elena, accustomed to hiding within herself, had yet to encounter someone whose presence demanded trust. Tayanita, accustomed to guarding others, had yet to meet someone whose spirit could ignite his own protective instincts. The stage was set. A frontier town at dawn, two souls poised at the edge of destiny, and a world that would soon test courage, trust, and the fragile beginnings of love. The quiet of the early morning was shattered by a sudden, harsh cry sound that made Elena's stomach twist with alarm. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. From the alley ahead came the unmistakable sound of struggle, a man's gruff voice, a woman's terrified whimper, the jangle of metal against wood. Years of caution screamed at her to turn and run, yet curiosity and compassion rooted her to the spot. Elena's heart pounded as she edged closer, peeking around the corner. A group of rough-looking men had cornered a merchant, their faces twisted with greed and malice. One of them brandished a knife, pressing it against the merchant's side as the others rifled through crates, tossing coins and trinkets into a coarse sack. The merchant's eyes darted to the alleyway, pleading silently for help. Elena's fingers tightened on the shawl around her shoulders. She had never intervened in violence before. The thought of stepping into danger made her knees tremble. Something in her chest refused to let the scene go unchallenged. From across the square, a shadow detached itself from the line of buildings. Tyanita moved with calm precision, his eyes fixed on the men. He did not rush. There was no panic in his stride. Every step was measured, deliberate, a predator closing in on prey while conserving his strength. Elena barely dared to breathe. As he approached, noting the fluidity in his movements, the quiet confidence that radiated from him, as he neared the alley, one of the bandits turned, sensing the shift in the air. "Hey, who's there?" The man barked, raising his knife defensively. Tyanita's voice, deep and steady, cut through the tension. "Leave him, now." There was no argument in his tone, no pleading, only authority. The leader of the bandits laughed, a cruel, rattling sound. "Or what, stranger?" He advanced, thinking strength would intimidate, but Tyanita was already upon them. In a series of swift, controlled movements, he disarmed the man, sending the knife clattering to the ground. The others hesitated, caught between fear and defiance. In a heartbeat, Tyanita had the situation under control. Every aggressor pinned, every threat neutralized, yet no unnecessary harm done. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the merchant. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice softening. Elena felt a strange mixture of awe and relief. She had expected violence, screams, perhaps even blood, but what she witnessed was precise, disciplined, almost sacred in its execution. Tyanita's presence was commanding, yet not cruel. For the first time in her life, Elena felt the strange, intoxicating pull of someone who could offer protection without condescension, a shield she did not need to fear. After ensuring the bandits were fleeing or incapacitated, Tyanita's gaze fell on Elena. She instinctively shrank back, feeling exposed under the scrutiny of such intense eyes. He stepped closer, but not threateningly. His presence was firm, grounding, almost comforting. "It's safe now," he said. The words were simple, but in them was a promise: safety, vigilance, and respect. Elena swallowed hard, realizing her voice had fled. Finally, she managed, Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she could offer. Tyanita inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging that gratitude alone was enough. In that fleeting moment, she sensed something profound, that this man, fierce as he was, would honor his duty to protect, not just by force, but with intention and care. As the morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the dust in the air, Elena and Tyanita stood in the quiet aftermath of chaos. Neither spoke further for a moment, yet an unspoken connection had formed, a recognition that their paths had crossed for a reason. For Elena, it was the first flicker of trust. For Tyanita, it was the first spark of a protective vow that would grow into something far deeper than mere obligation. In that narrow alley, under the nascent light of day, danger had forged the beginning of an unbreakable bond. And neither of them would ever be the same again. Night had fallen, and the town had grown quiet once more. The air smelled faintly of smoke from the few remaining hearths, mingling with the earthy scent of dust and wood. Elena sat on a worn bench near the edge of the square, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The adrenaline from the morning's chaos had faded, leaving her muscles tense and her mind restless. She had survived the encounter, yes, but the memory of the bandits, the knife, the fear had stirred something deeper within her. A desire not just to be safe, but to be understood. Tyanita appeared silently, as though the shadows themselves had given him shape. He did not startle her. There was a predictability in his movements, a calm precision that was almost comforting. He knelt at a respectful distance, not intruding, simply watching over her with the same vigilance that had saved her life earlier. His presence was protective, yet there was a softness beneath the intensity of his gaze and awareness that she was fragile, yet capable of more than she allowed herself to show. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken questions, of a growing bond that neither fully understood. Finally, Elena found her voice, trembling but resolute. "Tyanita," she began, uncertain how to frame the thought that had been pressing on her chest all day. He tilted his head, listening, giving her the space to continue. "I've never been with anyone," she whispered, barely audible, the words trembling like leaves in a storm. She pressed her hands to her lap as if to anchor herself, to remind herself that speaking them aloud did not make her weak. I've always been careful. Afraid, I suppose. Afraid of letting someone see me, truly see me." Tyanita's expression softened, though he did not speak immediately. There was no mockery, no judgment in his eyes, only recognition. He had seen fear before, yes, but rarely had it been mixed with such quiet strength. Here was someone who had survived life's dangers by her own wits, and yet still harbored a tenderness that demanded protection. Elena's voice grew even softer, a fragile thread in the night air. I'm a virgin. I've never loved like that, and I want to someday, but I'm afraid of being hurt, of being taken for granted." She finally dared to meet his eyes, searching for a flicker of understanding, a sign that he would not see her as weak for admitting it. Tyanita's response was a low, steady murmur, barely above the sound of the night wind. "You will not be taken for granted. Not by me." The weight behind his words was immense, carrying not only a promise but an unspoken vow. His gaze held hers, unwavering, and in it she sensed a commitment far deeper than casual affection or fleeting desire. It was a promise to protect her, to honor her boundaries, to cherish her trust as something sacred. The tension that had always lingered in Elena's chest, the fear of vulnerability, the worry that her innocence made her weak began to ease slightly. She realized that here, in this quiet night, she was not merely being watched, she was being seen. Not for what she lacked, but for the strength she carried quietly, for the courage it had taken to speak her truth. Tyanita shifted slightly, closing some of the distance between them without breaking the boundary of respect. "I will guard you with my life," he said softly, the words deliberate and sincere. "Not just from danger, but from anyone who would not honor your heart. That is my promise." Elena's breath caught. The weight of his vow, spoken so plainly, filled her with a warmth she had never known. In that single simple exchange, trust was built, fragile yet unbreakable. For the first time, she felt that letting someone in truly in might not lead to pain, but to safety, to understanding, to something profoundly human. And so, under the quiet sky, in the gentle embrace of shadows and starlight, Elena and Tyanita forged the first invisible threads of a bond that would shape the days to come, a bond of trust, of respect, and of devotion that neither would ever forget. The days that followed were marked by quiet routines, yet every step Elena took was now shadowed by the presence of Tyanita. He did not hover, nor did he smother her. Instead, he walked slightly behind, a silent guardian whose eyes seemed to absorb everything, It was a constant reassurance, a tether to safety she hadn't known she craved. For Elena, every glance, every gesture of attention from him sent a strange flutter through her chest, a feeling she couldn't yet name but couldn't ignore. They walked together through the town streets, helping merchants load crates, fetching supplies, and navigating the narrow alleys that led toward the outskirts. Tianita's presence was steady, a rhythm as natural as breathing. He offered his arm when the path became treacherous, his hand brushing hers in the smallest, most deliberate ways that made her pulse spike. It was never intrusive. It was always careful, always respectful, yet charged with an unspoken energy. Elena noticed how he listened when she spoke, how his gaze lingered just long enough to make her aware of being seen, not judged, not assessed, simply acknowledged. In moments of quiet, he shared stories of his people, their customs and their values. He spoke of courage not as the absence of fear, but as the decision to act despite it. Elena, in turn, told him of her childhood, her dreams, the small acts of rebellion she had carried out in the safety of her home. Their conversations often stretched long into the evening under the wide, starlit sky. With each word, each shared laugh or thoughtful silence, Elena felt herself lowering walls she had spent years building. But it was not just the safety that drew her to him. It was the small, unspoken ways he paid attention. He noticed when her hands trembled, offering a steadying grip. He noticed the way she looked at the horizon when lost in thought, and he said nothing, simply walking beside her. He noticed her hesitation when approaching new people, and instead of pushing her, he encouraged her with patience and quiet strength. Every observation, every subtle gesture, built a tension between them, an electric awareness that neither fully acknowledged, yet both felt. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long amber shadows over the town, Elena and Tianita paused by a stream that ran through the outskirts. She bent to cup the cool water in her hands, watching the ripples fan outward. He stood a few steps away, silent, his presence solid and reassuring. She glanced up, catching him looking at her, not with desire, but with something heavier, more profound. It was admiration, protection, and a hint of something that made her stomach twist in ways she had not felt before. "I never thought I'd feel this," Elena admitted quietly, almost to herself. Her fingers toyed with a small stone she had picked up, tracing its edges as if grounding herself. "Safe, I mean, and seen. Not just for what I am, but for what I could be." Tianita's voice was soft, deliberate. "You are more than you know," he said, "and I will not let anyone, any danger, any harm change that. You deserve that recognition and respect, always." Elena's pulse quickened at his words, the weight of them settling in her chest. She realized that the growing tension between them was not just physical. It was emotional, woven from trust, shared vulnerability, and unspoken longing. Every time he moved closer, every time their fingers brushed, it sent sparks through her, a mixture of fear and excitement. She wanted to lean into it. Yet her own hesitations, the ones she had confessed under the stars, held her back. Tianita, ever perceptive, did not push. Instead, he allowed the tension to build naturally, respecting her pace while silently affirming his protective vow. His restraint became its own form of intimacy, a demonstration of care that went beyond words. In his patience, Elena found herself drawn in, aware of the pull she could no longer ignore. By the time the stars fully blanketed the sky, their unspoken attraction had grown palpable. They had crossed the threshold from mere companionship to a delicate, charged intimacy, a connection that thrummed in every shared glance, every careful touch, every quiet acknowledgement of the other's presence. It was a tension neither could fully name, but both understood. A promise of something deeper, a bond slowly but surely solidifying into love. The tranquility of the town and its outskirts was deceptive. Life here was a fragile veneer over an unpredictable world, one Elena had learned to respect but never fully feared until now. Rumors of a gang of bandits had reached the outskirts, whispers of their ruthlessness and growing boldness. They were not like the small-time thieves Elena had narrowly escaped before. These men were organized, violent, and cunning, moving like shadows across the land, leaving devastation in their wake. Tyanita felt the tension before it reached her ears, before the merchant warnings reached her eyes. He noticed the subtle signs first: the abandoned campfire that was too clean, the tracks in the dust that did not belong to anyone known, the unnatural silence that pressed over the outskirts like a heavy blanket. He did not speak at first, only adjusting his posture, eyes scanning the horizon, fingers brushing the hilt of the knife at his side. Elena, watching him, could sense his unease. His instincts were always alert, yet today there was something more attention that hinted at danger far beyond the ordinary. "Something's coming," Tyanita said finally, voice low and calm. Not a question, not a suggestion, just a statement of fact. Elena felt her stomach tighten. She trusted him implicitly, yet the words carried weight. Her mind raced with images of bandits, of violence, of helplessness, and she realized how deeply dependent she had become on his presence. The fear that gripped her was familiar, yet tempered now by the knowledge that someone capable, someone strong, was watching over her. Over the next few days, signs of the gang's movements became impossible to ignore. Stolen supplies were reported. At nearby farms, travelers whispered of violent encounters, and the wind carried the faint, ominous echo of hooves at night. Tyanita took charge of their precautions, leading Elena through safer paths, scouting ahead, and setting small traps to detect intruders. She followed, silently observing his skill, impressed not only by his strength but by his foresight. Each time he scanned the horizon or read a trail, she felt the weight of his commitment to her safety, to her life. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in streaks of crimson, the danger became immediate. A group of men appeared on a ridge, silhouetted against the sky, armed and moving deliberately. They had found the trail, and they were coming straight for the outskirts of the town. Elena froze, caught between panic and awe at Tyanita's calm demeanor. "Stay behind me," he instructed, positioning himself between Elena and the threat. His voice carried authority that brooked no argument. Elena obeyed instinctively, heart hammering in her chest. She had never felt so vulnerable, yet so safe at the same time. She watched him move with precision, silent as a shadow, scanning their attacker's approach, ready to intercept at the first sign of danger. The first skirmish came quickly. One of the bandits charged, underestimating Tyanita's speed and skill. In moments, the man was disarmed and pinned to the ground, bewildered and defeated. The others hesitated, unsure of how to proceed against someone so capable, so unyielding. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anyone move like this, had never experienced the terrifying beauty of controlled force. Yet the Beyond-the-Vara threat was not fully neutralized. The remaining men regrouped, testing his defenses with crude weapons and bold maneuvers. Tyanita's focus never wavered. His attention was split between the attackers and Elena, his every movement a shield, a promise of protection made real. Her trust in him deepened with every passing second, intertwining with fear, admiration, and an unspoken reliance she had not expected to feel so strongly. By the time the sun fully disappeared behind the hills, the bandits had retreated, their courage broken by Tyanita's relentless defense. He turned to Elena, his expression steady but intense, and simply said, "You are safe." The words carried weight far beyond their simplicity, proof that he had kept his vow, proof that his protective instincts were more than mere duty. They were a declaration of devotion. That night, as they made camp beneath the stars, Elena felt a strange mixture of relief and exhilaration. The danger had been real, tangible, and terrifying, but it had also solidified something far deeper between them. The bond forged in trust, in shared vulnerability and survival, was now unbreakable, strengthened by the fire of threat and the certainty of his protection. The night after the bandits' retreat was quiet, but the air was thick with the echoes of what had just transpired. Elena sat near the small campfire, the embers casting flickering shadows across her face. She wrapped her shawl tightly around herself. Though it was no longer the cold she sought to shield from, it was the vulnerability. She felt the raw awareness of how close danger had come. Her heart still pounded from the encounter, but now it was mixed with something new, a profound sense of trust, a reliance on someone who had proven, without question, that her life mattered to him. Anita sat a few paces away, maintaining the silent vigil that had become second nature to him. Yet tonight, there was a softness in his gaze when he looked at her, an unspoken acknowledgment of the bond they shared. He did not speak at first. He simply observed, allowing Elena to find her footing in the aftermath of fear. Finally, he shifted. Closer, settling just outside the circle of firelight, close enough that she could sense his presence, but not so close as to crowd her. "Elena," he said, his voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of sincerity, "tonight was dangerous. But you stood with me, even when fear tried to bind you. That matters." Elena's throat tightened, and she struggled to find words. She had never been praised for courage, not in such a personal, validating way. I was scared," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper, "terrified. But somehow, knowing you were there made me feel stronger, safer." Her hands fidgeted in her lap, twisting the edges of her shawl. "I don't know how to explain it. It's like you see me, really see me, and it doesn't frighten you. It makes you care." Anita's eyes softened, the intensity of his usual vigilance giving way to a gentleness that startled her. "That is because I do care," he said simply. "Not for what you can do, or for what others might see, but for you, your life, your heart, your spirit. That is why I will guard you. That is why I have vowed it. Not because it is duty alone, but because it is what I choose." Her breath caught in her chest. The weight of his words, the depth of his sincerity, resonated in a way she had never experienced. Elena realized that her walls, so carefully constructed over years of fear and caution, were beginning to crumble, not from force, but from trust, from recognition, from the undeniable truth of someone who honored her very being. I think I'm beginning to understand," she murmured, eyes glistening with emotion, "what it means to trust someone, to let someone in, and to feel safe, truly safe." She paused, the words trembling as they left her lips. "I've never felt this before, not in my life." Anita took a slow, deliberate breath, sitting a little closer, careful to respect her space. "Then know this," he said, his voice unwavering yet tender. "Safety is not just about keeping danger away. It is about giving someone the freedom to be themselves, to be vulnerable, to be human. That is what I offer you, Elena. Not only protection from the world, but a place where you can exist without fear." Elena's heart ached with a mixture of longing and relief. She had never imagined that someone could offer such an unwavering commitment without expectation, without judgment. Slowly, tentatively, she allowed herself to lean just slightly toward him, testing the boundaries of the trust she had begun to place in him. Anita did not move, did not force closeness. He simply remained a steadfast presence, a silent reassurance. That she could take her time. And in that shared silence, heavy with unspoken understanding, something profound shifted. The fear that had dominated her life gave way to something warmer, more expansive. The realization that love could exist in tandem with safety, that devotion could be fierce yet gentle, that vulnerability could be a strength when met with care. Night under the stars, by the dying glow of the fire, their bond solidified not through words alone, but through the shared intensity of survival, trust, and mutual recognition. Elena allowed herself, for the first time, to imagine a life in which she could let someone in completely. And Tayanita, true to his vow, remained her unwavering guardian not only of her body, but of her heart. The sun had barely risen when the first signs of danger appeared. Elena, walking ahead along the narrow path that wound through the forested outskirts of the town, felt the familiar prickle of unease crawl across her skin. Birds had fallen silent, and the wind carried a stillness that was almost unnatural. She slowed, instinctively glancing behind her, and caught sight of Tayanita's shadow moving with quiet precision among the trees. He had sensed it first as, always before any threat had revealed itself, before instinct alone would have been enough to warn her. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice steady but edged with tension. Elena nodded, drawing the shawl tighter around herself. They moved cautiously, each step deliberate, ears straining for even the slightest anomaly. Tayanita's senses were attuned to every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, every distant sound of movement. It was unnerving to watch, yet comforting. He was both shield and guide, moving with a silent authority that promised safety even in the unknown. Then it happened. A sudden crash to their left, followed by the muffled hiss of men advancing through the underbrush. Tayanita's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. Elena froze, her heart hammering, recognizing the unmistakable telltale signs of an ambush. Bandits. More than a handful, and determined. She felt a surge of fear she had not anticipated, fear not just for herself, but for the quiet life she had always hoped to preserve. "Behind me," Tayanita commanded softly. Without waiting for her to respond, he stepped forward, placing himself between Elena and the approaching danger. His stance was firm, wide, every muscle coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Elena's pulse raced, but she obeyed, trusting him utterly. The men emerged from the shadows, crude weapons raised, faces twisted in confidence born of underestimating him. The first bandit lunged. Tayanita moved with a speed and precision that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The man was disarmed. In moments, sent stumbling backward, bewildered and beaten before he could comprehend the warrior before him. Others hesitated, trying to gauge his capabilities, but he was already moving, a force that flowed seamlessly between defense and counterattack. Elena watched, mesmerized and terrified, as Tayanita became a living shield, every motion protecting her as surely as any wall or weapon could. One of the bandits, bolder than the rest, tried to circle behind, aiming for her directly. In an instant, Tayanita's gaze flicked to the movement. Without hesitation, he shifted, placing his body between Elena and the threat. Time seemed to slow as he intercepted the attacker, delivering a precise, controlled maneuver that incapacitated the man without unnecessary harm. Elena felt her heart constrict not with fear, but with awe. She realized in stark clarity the full measure of his vow. He would guard her with his life, and he would do so without question, without hesitation. The remaining attackers faltered, their confidence broken by the display of skill and ferocity. One by one, they retreated, slipping back into the forest, leaving Tayanita and Elena standing in the aftermath of sudden violence. The quiet returned, heavy and almost sacred, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Elena's legs shook. and she sank to the ground, clutching the shawl around herself. Tayanita approached her, kneeling beside her, eyes scanning the surrounding trees one last time. "You are safe," he said, his voice steady, firm, but carrying a tenderness she had come to rely upon. "No harm will come to you while I am here." Elena's chest tightened, and tears prickled her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of his protection and devotion. She realized that trust had never felt so tangible, so alive. In that single moment, she understood the depth of the bond between them, forged not just in words or promises, but in the crucible of danger itself. As they resumed their cautious journey, the forest returning to its normal rhythm, Elena walked just behind him, feeling the steady presence of Tayanita like a living shield. Fear had tested them, but it had also solidified what words alone could never convey: an unbreakable trust, a promise upheld with life itself, and a connection that neither danger nor time could diminish. The forest was quiet once more, the early morning sun filtering through the canopy in soft golden beams. Elena walked slowly, her legs still shaky from the night's events, but each step was steadier than before. The adrenaline that had kept her alert had faded, leaving in its place a reflective calm. The danger was over, or at least, it had been survived, and now the aftermath offered a rare moment to breathe, to process, and to acknowledge the depth of what had just occurred. Tayanita walked beside her, silent but vigilant, his presence a comforting anchor. His eyes scanned the path ahead even as he stole glances at her, assessing not threats in the trees this time, but her well-being. The protective intensity that had defined him during the attack had softened, replaced by quiet concern. Elena realized that it wasn't just his skill that impressed her, or the way he had moved as if danger itself obeyed him. It was the way he had watched over her, not as a ward, but as someone who genuinely valued her life and her trust. "I thank you," she said softly, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was tentative, carrying the weight of emotion she hadn't fully allowed herself to feel until now. "For everything, for protecting me, for being there." Tayanita's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he let her words settle, allowing their significance to resonate between them. Then, slowly, he said, "You do not need to thank me, Elena. I promised you safety. I vowed it with my life. And I meant it, not because it is duty alone, but because your life, your heart, are precious. You are worth every risk." Elena's chest tightened, her pulse quickening not from fear, but from the profound depth of his declaration. For the first time, she truly understood the nature of his vow. It was not simply a promise of physical protection. It was a commitment of heart and spirit. He had risked himself without hesitation, and in doing so had communicated something far stronger than words could convey, that she mattered, deeply, irrevocably. They walked a few more steps in silence, the forest gradually giving way to the familiar outskirts of the town. Elena felt the tension in her body ease, replaced by a warmth that radiated from within. The danger had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been transformative. It had stripped away the lingering fear that had kept her from fully trusting another person. With Tayanita, she realized, vulnerability was not weakness, it was the foundation of connection, of love, of safety. As they approached a small clearing, where they often stopped to rest, Tayanita finally spoke again. "You fought fear tonight," he said, voice soft but firm. "And you did not falter. That courage. It is yours, as much as mine is mine." He reached out almost instinctively and offered his hand. Elena hesitated for just a moment before taking it. The contact was gentle, affirming, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and partnership that had been forged in the crucible of danger. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax fully in his presence. She no longer felt the constant undercurrent of fear that had defined her life for so long. Instead, there was only the awareness of the bond between them, a bond strengthened by adversity, by shared peril, and by the unwavering promise that he would always guard her. They remained in the clearing for a while, watching as sunlight filtered through the branches and dappled the ground around them. Elena felt a quiet sense of peace, punctuated by the occasional smile or gentle word from Tayanita. She understood with clarity that their connection was no longer fragile or tentative. It had been tested, proven resilient, and had emerged stronger than either of them could have anticipated. As they prepared to continue their journey, Elena looked up at him, her heart full with a mixture of gratitude, trust, and something deeper, something that had begun quietly during their shared trials and now pulsed with unspoken promise. Tayanita, sensing her gaze, offered a small, approving nod. In that moment, no words were needed. The conflict had been resolved, but the bond had been solidified. They were no longer merely protector and protected, they were partners united by trust, courage, and the beginnings of something profound. And as they moved forward together, side by side, the weight of danger lifted, leaving only the promise of shared journeys, mutual care, and a connection that neither time nor adversity could break. The days that followed the bandits' retreat were marked by an unusual calm, a quiet that seemed almost sacred after the storm of danger they had endured. Elena and Tayanita traveled together through the outskirts of the town, moving along familiar paths now imbued with a deeper sense of connection. Each step they took side by side felt natural, a rhythm born of shared experiences, mutual trust, and the unspoken understanding that neither would falter in the presence of the other. Elena found herself observing him more closely than before, not merely for signs of danger, but for the subtleties of his character. She noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the small gestures of attention that spoke of care rather than obligation. The moments were quiet, almost imperceptible, a brush of fingers against hers as they passed supplies, a hand hovering near hers to guide her without pressing, a gaze that lingered just long enough to make her heart race without intruding. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in deep oranges and pinks, they paused beside a tranquil river. The water mirrored the colors of the sky, rippling gently under the soft evening breeze. Elena sank onto a smooth rock at the water's edge, her shawl wrapped loosely around her. Tayanita stood a few steps away, his eyes scanning the horizon. Even as they repeatedly flicked back to her, a silent affirmation of his protective instinct. "Elena," he said finally, his voice low and calm, carrying both reassurance and intensity, "you have come far. Not just in distance, but in courage. I see it and I honor it." Her heart quickened, a mixture of pride, vulnerability, and longing swirling together. "Tayanita, I've never felt this before," she admitted, her voice trembling with sincerity. "Safe, understood, cared for, all at once. I didn't think it was possible to feel so seen by someone." He stepped closer, closing the distance deliberately, yet carefully. "And you are," he said, his tone gentle but resolute. "Every part of you deserves to be seen and cherished. I vowed to guard you, Elena, not just from danger, but from anything that would harm your heart. That vow extends to all of you, all that you are." Her breath caught at the weight of his words. For so long she had equated love with risk, vulnerability with exposure, intimacy with fear. And yet, in Tayanita's presence, she realized that love could be both safe and profound, fierce and gentle. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his. He did not pull away. Instead, he lowered himself to sit beside her, their hands intertwined naturally, their proximity charged with an electric warmth that neither had fully acknowledged until now. They sat in silence for a long moment, their river, flowing quietly beside them, the sky deepening into twilight. Elena leaned slightly against him, feeling the strength in his presence without fear, feeling the warmth of his commitment without doubt. Tayanita, in turn, kept his hand over hers, a steady, grounding reassurance that spoke louder than any words. "Good." Finally, Elena whispered, "I trust you. Completely." The words were simple, yet monumental. They encapsulated months of shared danger, moments of vulnerability, and the slow, deliberate building of trust. Tayanita's response was a soft murmur against her hair, his lips brushing her temple in a gesture both tender and sacred. "And I will honor that trust always," he said. The sincerity of his vow resonated deeply within her, and she realized that this moment, the quiet affirmation of love, the gentle intertwining of trust and intimacy, was the true culmination of their journey. As night fell, they remained side by side, hands entwined, hearts aligned. There was no rush, no forceful declarations, only a profound understanding that they had found something rare and enduring. Love, trust, and devotion had blossomed from the trials they had faced, and in this quiet riverside moment, they allowed themselves to fully embrace it. For Elena and Tayanita, the bond forged in danger and nurtured through care had reached its fullest expression. And under the starlit sky, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, united, devoted, and inseparable. The first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, bathing the frontier town in a soft golden glow. Birds sang tentatively in the trees, and the wind carried the scent of dew and earth. Elena and Tayanita walked together along a familiar path at the outskirts, side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, their movements in quiet harmony. The danger that had once stalked them seemed a distant memory, though its lessons remained etched in both their hearts. Months had passed since the confrontation with the bandits, months of travel, shared stories, and quiet companionship. Each day had strengthened their bond, each challenge had reinforced their trust, and each moment of shared laughter or small kindness had deepened their affection. The fiery intensity of survival had evolved into a steady, enduring devotion, one built not only on protection but on mutual understanding and respect. Elena glanced at Tayanita, feeling a warmth she could no longer describe as simple affection. It was deeper, rooted in the countless trials they had faced together, in the silent acknowledgments and small gestures that had come to define their relationship. She no longer feared vulnerability, no longer hesitated to trust. With him, she had discovered the rarest of gifts, a love that was as safe as it was passionate, as grounding as it was uplifting. Tayanita, ever observant, noticed her gaze and offered a small, approving smile. There was no need for words. He understood her without explanation, as she understood him. Their connection was not fragile, nor was it hurried. It had grown deliberately, like a river carving its path through solid rock, patient yet unstoppable. They reached a quiet clearing, a place they had come to favor during their travels. The river, calm and reflective, mirrored the sky above, and the soft rustle of leaves created a tranquil backdrop. Tayanita paused, turning to face Elena fully. "Elena," he began, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had first drawn her to him. "Our journey has been long, and yet I feel it has only just begun." Elena's heart swelled. "I feel the same," she replied softly. "I've learned so much about courage, trust, and love. And I've learned that with you, I am safe, and I can be myself completely. That is more than I ever imagined possible." Tayanita stepped closer, taking her hands in his. His gaze was unwavering, his expression resolute yet tender. "I vowed to guard you with my life," he said. "But that vow has grown. I will guard your heart, your spirit, and your happiness." not as a duty alone, but as my choice every day for as long as I live." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy and relief, not fear. She had found something rare in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. Someone who would love her fully, protect her fiercely, and honor her completely. "And I choose you," she whispered. "Every day I choose you." They embraced. A slow, deliberate movement that spoke of trust, intimacy, and devotion. The closeness was not hurried, not driven by passion alone, but by the steady assurance that they were partners in every sense of the word. Elena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the weight of his promise in every breath. Tyanita held her close, a protective yet gentle presence, and for the first time in her life, Elena felt truly secure body, mind, and heart. As the sun climbed higher, painting the clearing with light, they stepped forward together, ready to continue their journey. Their bond was no longer defined by fear or danger, but by choice, trust, and unwavering devotion. They would face whatever challenges the frontier might bring, storms, enemies, or uncertainty, dashed together. And in that shared path, side by side, hand in hand, Elena and Tyanita carried with them the certainty that their love was not fleeting. It was forged in danger, nurtured through trust, and solidified in devotion. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, guardians of each other's hearts, partners in life and love, inseparable. The river flowed beside them, steady and eternal, a quiet testament to the enduring promise they had made, not just to survive, but to thrive together.